They said the alien princess had refused 1,000 champions. And that was not poetry, not legend, it was a measured record. Princess Ishara of the House of Loom had rejected warlords bred in fusion pits, psionic kings, and gene-sculpted paragons. By the time the human named Ilias Varen arrived in her sky, the whole galaxy believed her hand would never be won because no one understood her real test. They thought she wanted strength. They thought she wanted obedience. They thought she wanted spectacle. They were wrong. And the first hint of that truth came the night her moon vanished. Not exploded, not burned, vanished. Erased so completely that the tides on 3 worlds stumbled in the same breath, and every sensor grid from Vaer to the Fringe screamed with one possible translation. Boundary breach detected, source unknown, origin, the void. The court of Var was built to make heroes feel small. Its pillars were living crystal, its ceiling a sea held overhead by gravitic lace. And on the morning after the moon disappeared, the princess stood at the center of that impossible chamber in armor white as starfire. Watching delegations from 16 species argue over who would lead the response. The Karos wanted bombardment, the Illyri wanted containment, the Matari wanted negotiation, and each speaker pitched their courage like merchandise, offering fleets, relics, blood oaths, and marriage contracts with all the confidence of beings who had never stared into the immeasurable. Elias stood near the back in a plain black uniform with no ornaments except a mission patch from a dead human colony. He was there because he had survived the Harrowrift disaster, because he had once spent 71 hours alone in an unshielded rescue shell while space peeled open around him. Because when the summons went out for anyone who had encountered the impossible and returned sane enough to speak, his file rose to the top. Then she dismissed 3 suitors in under a minute. 1 for boasting, 1 for lying. 1 for speaking of her hand while her people were grieving a moon. And when silence finally fell, Elias spoke without asking permission if the Void wanted conquest. It would have started with your capital. It took the moon because it wanted your attention. Outrage rippled instantly. But Ishara raised 1 hand, and the room obeyed. Why would the Void want anything? She asked. And Elias met her gaze as if it were a rifle sight. Because loneliness at that scale looks like hunger to everyone else. That was the first time the princess looked at him as more than background. And it annoyed half the chamber because Elias had none of the approved heroic proportions. He was lean where their warriors were massive, scarred where their nobles were polished, his face too tired to be beautiful. But he carried something rare in a royal court. Indifference to being seen. He did not bow prettily. He did not try to impress her. He only stepped closer to the holomap as palace intelligence projected the wound where the moon had been. A black sphere hung there, not visible exactly, but inferred from the failure of light, of signal, of time sync, as if reality had decided to go around a missing answer. I saw a pocket like this in Harrow, Elias said. Not as large, but enough. Enough to know you do not attack it. The Karos warlord snarled that fear was not strategy. Elias nodded once and said, Good, then stop confusing them. The room went cold. Ishara descended from her dais slowly, her crown dim beside the intelligence in her expression. You speak as though you know the void, she said, and Elias answered, No, princess. I speak as someone who knows what it is to be trapped with something larger than your language. In any other mouth it would have sounded absurd, but there was a silence after it. The kind that meant memory had entered the room. Ishara dismissed the court, every noble, every suitor, and told Elias to walk with her beneath the lower gardens, where bioluminescent roots hung like inverted constellations and no listening. Device survived long because the trees had been designed to drink signal. There she asked him the question no suitor had ever answered correctly. What would you offer me? He looked out through the glass at the starless scar where the moon had been, and said, The truth, even if it costs me everything. And then the dark sent back a message. It arrived not in words, but in disappearance. 3 scout ships vanished at the edge of the breach. Then a drone lattice blinked out between one heartbeat and the next. Then every child on Vaer woke from the same nightmare. Describing a shore with no sea and a voice asking why it had been left alone, panic spread faster than any plague. Because plagues at least followed biology, this followed thought. And while admirals assembled glorious plans for glorious failure, Elias studied the nightmare reports with the princess through 2 sleepless rotations. Patterns emerged where older species saw mysticism. Every child described a hand reaching from black water. Every child said the hand was empty. Every child cried at the same final image. A single light walking away, not running, not falling, walking. Elias traced the data and found what the academies had missed. It was reacting most violently to force, gently to observation, and unpredictably to dominance. Like an animal, one advisor suggested. No, Elias said. More like a wound that expects another blade. Ishara stood beside him in the strategy vault with her armor, abandoned for a simple dark robe, and looked suddenly much younger than her legend. The galaxy called her impossible because she never chose. Because she let kings kneel and rise empty-handed. But in that quiet vault she admitted the truth. Every suitor who came to me wanted to possess what they admired, not protect what they did not understand. They wanted my crown, my bloodline, my armies, not me. Elias did not offer comfort. Perhaps that was why she trusted him. He only said, "Then maybe your test was the right one for the wrong age." A pulse ran through the palace alarms before she could answer. The breach was expanding, not toward Vare, but downward. Into subspace routes beneath the system. If it reached the transit web, half the galaxy could be touched. Admirals shouted for battle stations, and Ishara turned to Elias with a steadiness that looked very much like fear held by discipline. "If we cannot fight it, how do we stop it?" He looked at the tactical bloom, at the spreading geometry of absence, at the impossible shore from 1,000 children's dreams, and said, the one thing no one else in the palace would have dared. Somebody has to go inside alone. The room nearly tore itself apart over that proposal. Counselors called it madness, nobles called it suicide theater. One rejected suitor accused Elias of inventing a death march to appear brave. Elias let them speak. Ishara did not defend him immediately. She listened, watched, judged, and then demanded a volunteer roster from every fleet. From every house, from every warrior order, names poured in by the thousands. Proud, eager, desperate to be remembered. But Elias shook his head as the list grew. No team, no formation, no escort. It has to be one person, one signal, one mind. Everything else will read as invasion. Outrage hit harder then. Because courage in groups is a celebrated currency. Courage alone is a private debt. One by one, the volunteers withdrew. Some angrily, some with excuses, some with sincere sorrow. Even the famed Karos warlord looked away when told there would be no weapons. No support craft, no return guarantee. The princess watched their silence harden like cooling metal. And something in her expression changed forever. Elias stepped forward without ceremony. "I'll go." The chamber objected all at once. Ishara's voice cut through them like a blade drawn from ice. "Enough." Then she descended from the throne and stood before Elias, so close that the court could see the conflict in her eyes. Not romantic, not yet. Something older and more dangerous? Recognition. "You understand that you may not come back," she said. Elias almost smiled. "Princess, I'm human. We figured that out before we left our first ocean." Still, she asked him one last question. "Why you? Why alone?" And Elias answered with a flat honesty that left no room for applause. "Because I know what it is to be terrified and keep walking anyway, and because if this thing is truly lonely, then sending someone who understands loneliness is our best chance." Ishar removed a ring from her own hand. "A band of luminous metal, carrying the seal of Loom, if you go under my authority. All Vare goes with you," she said, "if you are lost." "My house will remember you as kin," the court gasped. Elias accepted the ring not like a prize, but like weight. Some stories turn on love. This one turned on witness. The vessel prepared for Elias was the smallest in the royal fleet. A single pilot descent craft with a hull woven from adaptive lattice and prayer technology. Ishara insisted on overseeing the retrofit herself, stripping every weapon from the craft. replacing them with sensory arrays, translation seeds, and a beacon keyed to neural patterns as the engineers worked. The suitors watched from gallery shadows, and for the first time they understood the shape of their defeat. She had been waiting for someone who could step toward annihilation without trying to own it first before launch. Ishara met Elias in the observatory where the false tide from the missing moon still dragged at Vare's oceans below. She wore no crown, only a simple mantle when I was young, she said. My tutors told me that power draws devotion. Later I learned it mostly draws hunger. Every warrior who stood before me wanted to prove he could conquer for me. None asked whether I was tired of conquest. Elias leaned against the transparent wall and looked at the wound in the sky. Humans ask stupid questions early, he said. It saves time. A laugh escaped her then, brief and real. What is the stupid question you would ask me now? Elias thought for a moment, then said, when this is over, assuming we both get to be difficult about it, what do you actually want? Not as princess, not as symbol, as you. Ishara stared at him as though the universe had shifted under her feet, because no one with access to her throne had ever asked it so plainly. I want one room in one place where no one needs anything from me for a single evening. Elias nodded as if she had named a tactical coordinate. That can be arranged. Then the launch sirens began, and all the softness in the room became duty again. She walked him to the hangar through ranks of soldiers and nobles and technicians who did not cheer. At the ramp, she caught his wrist. Come back, she said, not as a command, as a rare admission of desire. Elias answered in the only way honest people can answer impossible requests. I'll try. Asterisk, the breach swallowed the descent craft without impact. Without heat? Without any of the dramatic violence training sims had promised? 1 second, Elias was flying through distorted starlight. The next, he was nowhere the instruments could define. Time sheared, sound dropped away, and the universe became a shoreline made of memory. Black water stretched in all directions under a sky without stars. His craft did not so much land as agreed to exist there. The whole groaned, then went still. Elias cut every transmission except the passive neural beacon and stepped out alone. His boots touched, not sand, not metal, but something that felt like cooled grief ahead. The dark rippled, and figures emerged from it, not monsters, but reflections of himself at different ages. The boy staring at hospital glass while storms drowned a coastal district. The cadet holding the hand of a dying crewmate in Harrow Rift. The man floating in that rescue shell for 71 hours while the universe whispered that survival was delay. Each version asked him the same question with a different face. Why did they leave you? Elias nearly broke then. Because bravery in stories is posture and clean blood. But real courage is often a tired person choosing not to lie. They didn't, he said to the dark. They just couldn't stay. The shoreline shuddered, the water pulled back, revealing shapes beneath it so large the human mind should have refused them. And at the center of the receding sea stood the thing Vare had called the Void. It had no stable form, only the impression of enormity constrained by sorrow. A hand built of eclipses, a face suggested by absence, extinguished suns moving inside a body made from the place's equations fail when it spoke. The words arrived through his memories because no throat could carry them. I reached, and all things fled. Elias tasted blood where he had bitten his cheek to stay anchored. You reached like destruction, he answered, because maybe destruction is all you ever learned. The vastness trembled, then came something much closer to pain. I was made to hold endings, it said, when the last stars of the first makers dimmed. They placed their grief in me so the living could remain light. I carried all that was abandoned, all that was lost, all that died without witness. And when I grew full, they feared me. They sealed me outside, they named me Void, so they would not have to call me child. The word child nearly destroyed him because suddenly the nightmare shore, the empty hand, the vanished moon, all of it reframed. Not a predator announcing conquest, but an orphan pounding on the walls of reality with the only strength that had ever been given. Back in the Royal Command Vault, alarms screamed as the breach convulsed around Elias's beacon. Admirals begged the princess to cut the connection before the system collapsed. But Ishara stood at the central relay with both hands on the neural bridge, feeling the translation fragments coming through him in shreds of sensation. Loneliness, abandonment, ancient burden. And in that moment, she understood why every suitor had failed her. Not because they lacked strength, but because they worshipped the wrong use of it. They believed power proved itself by domination, while this stubborn, under-decorated human was proving that the highest form of strength was presence, staying where terror wanted you to vanish. The court demanded extraction. Ishara refused, even when the breach sent out a tidal pulse that turned 12 cruisers into drifting husks, because pulling Elias out by force now would confirm every lesson the Void had ever learned. That contact meant violence. That approach meant seizure. She opened a broadcast channel directly into his beacon, a risk no advisor approved, and spoke not as ruler, but as witness. Elias, if you can hear me, it is listening through you. Tell it this. It is seen. Out in the impossible shore, Elias heard her voice like a lantern in fog. And for the first time since entering the breach, he was not entirely alone. He looked up at the vast dark child of dead gods and said, "There is a princess beyond this wound, and an entire world, and they know you are here. Not as enemy, not as weapon, as something that suffered too long without a name." The Void recoiled, then surged closer, not in attack, but in desperate disbelief. Seen had asked, the single word breaking across dimensions. "Yes," Elias said. "And because humans are strange creatures, who sometimes save galaxies with the same instincts that make them stop for injured animals and hold strangers while they cry." He did the most dangerous thing available. He stepped forward and placed his burned, mortal hand against the eclipse-built outline of the Void's enormous palm. "I see you." What happened next rewrote half the theology in the spiral. The breach did not explode. It wept. Darkness folded inward, not collapsing, but unclenching, and the black sea around Elias filled with light. Not harsh light, not weapon light, but the soft glow of things finally remembered. The lost moon of Ver emerged first. Not restored in matter, but released in pattern. Its tides returning to stable law, even as its physical form remained gone. Then came voices, billions of them, not alive, not dead, only witnessed. Every ending the Void had been forced to carry alone, dispersing into the fabric of space where endings belonged. Elias dropped to one knee under the pressure of it. Bones screaming, vision tearing white at the edges. Yet he kept his hand in place, because sometimes being human means understanding that your body is the cheapest thing you own in the face of something sacred. Across the link, Ishara felt the burden lifting from the entity. And when the Void spoke again, it was smaller somehow. Not lesser. Just no longer strangled by endless accumulation. "If I release all that I contain," it asked, "what remains of me?" Elias laughed then, half delirium, half species-level instinct. Enough to find out. That answer was perhaps the most human answer ever given. The Void withdrew its hand, and where its palm had touched Elias, there remained a mark of living black, threaded with starlight. Around them, the shoreline dissolved, becoming a field of distant suns. Paths opened outward, not breaches now, but doors. Stable, luminous, navigable. The transit web beneath Ver stopped trembling. The alarms in the palace died, and every screen in the command vault filled with one reading: anomaly reclassified. Sentient threshold entity stabilized. Hostile intent not detected. Then Elias's beacon vanished for 3 eternal seconds. And Ishara forgot the court, forgot dignity, forgot history. She whispered his name like prayer and threat at once. Then the beacon reappeared outside the breach, small, tumbling, alive. Recovery teams launched before anyone could issue the order. And when they dragged Elias from the descent craft, half-conscious and bleeding from places that had no medical vocabulary, the first face he saw was Ishara herself. Kneeling on a hangar deck, he tried to speak, failed, then managed. "Moon's still gone, sorry." And she laughed through tears she did not bother hiding. "Idiot," she said softly. "You brought back the dawn, asterisk." The galaxy took years to understand what happened in a single hour. Empires tried to classify it as diplomacy, religion, anomaly management, human recklessness. Anything except what it plainly was: compassion weaponized into salvation. Schools on Earth taught the event as first contact with the threshold child. Vare recorded it as the night of witness. And the suitors, who had once crossed sectors to win. Princess Ashera's hand found themselves memorialized in a footnote beneath the man who had never asked for it. Because when the celebrations finally cooled and the treaties were signed around the new, luminous doors left behind by the healed entity, Ishara called a final court. Every house attended. Every former suitor came armored in whatever dignity remained to them. And before them all, she stepped down from her throne to where Elias stood, still healing, still lean, still unadorned, except for the ring of loom and the black star-threaded mark on his palm. And she spoke with the clarity of someone who had spent a lifetime refusing the wrong stories. I rejected warriors because they believed love was possession, because they measured devotion and conquest, because they offered me worlds already kneeling, when what I needed was one person willing to stand beside what frightened us both. She turned then, not to Elias first, but to the gathered galaxy. Let it be recorded that the human faced the void alone when your bravest demanded witnesses. Let it be recorded that he crossed into annihilation without promise of glory, and that he returned not with a corpse to boast over, but with understanding. Then at last she faced him fully. And the whole chamber saw it, not a princess rewarding a savior, but a woman choosing the one person who had looked at both her power and her wariness and desired, doubt neither ownership nor applause. Elias Varen, she said, voice low, certain. Come with me, not as victor, not as subject, as my equal. The silence after that was vast enough to hold a moon. Elias glanced around at stunned nobles, wounded egos, cameras, and answered in the same plain tone he had used from the beginning, only if we get that room you promised. The court broke then, shock giving way to laughter. Disbelief, outrage, wonder, and hope. Ishara smiled, truly smiled, and took his hand before all creation, the marked human palm against the hand that had held a kingdom at distance for years. And somewhere, beyond mapped space, the former void, no longer alone, opened one more gentle door among the stars, because in the end, that is what the galaxy learned from the princess who rejected every warrior, and the human who walked into nothing with empty hands. The universe does not always need another conqueror. Sometimes it needs one stubborn soul willing to face the dark, listen to its grief, and answer with the oldest human miracle of all, I am here,